There are three reasons why Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor and martyr, is remembered and celebrated in this country, but John Brown is largely overlooked. Let's consider. First, it's widely accepted, as it should be, that the Holocaust and the racist program of the Nazis overall was evil. Not just bad, but evil. Only marginal misfits and outright racists and anti-Semites would deny this. But throughout the West, and especially in the United States of America, Hitler is understood as the epitome of evil. You can see this reflected in Hollywood movies where everybody is happy to slaughter German soldiers all the time in the worst ways. That's just a cultural way of acknowledging that Hitler and the Nazis were evil. So number one, the acceptance of the evil of the Nazis and the Holocaust makes Bonhoeffer a great hero. Now, secondly, there is an active agency to keep the Holocaust on the forefront of social and political memory. Now, this is not a bad thing, yet the point remains that there is an ideological commitment along a range of people, liberals and conservatives alike, to keep the Holocaust in the public mind, to keep it in memory, and to connect it with present concerns over anti-Semitism. Interestingly, even the controversial Florida curriculum, the one that doesn't want white kids to feel guilty about slavery, even that curriculum mandates Holocaust education in Florida schools. So Bonhoeffer is going to be celebrated and remembered in such a perspective generated by an actual agenda. The third is that Bonhoeffer died fighting an evil in another land, in another country, the evil of another people other than white people in the United States. Now, we all know it's always easier to remember the guilt of others, to point out the wrongs of others, more than it is to confront our own guilt and our own wrongs. Now, that's not just true about individuals, it's true about nations and societies. And so for a nation like the United States, which is much more willing to look at the evils of the Germans in the World War II era than the wrongs of our own forefathers, it's natural that Bonhoeffer would be widely celebrated. It's just easier. And so let me turn those same reasons upside down, because they tell us a lot about why John Brown is not widely remembered and certainly not widely celebrated in the United States. The first is that slavery, that is black chattel slavery, racist slavery that legally defined black people as property, yet it is not widely accepted and believed that black chattel slavery was evil. Black enslavement often has even been sentimentalized in this nation, or at best qualified. And what I mean qualified is that it's acknowledged that slavery was wrong. It's acknowledged that slavery had to come to an end in some sense in order to really make this nation appear to be what it claims to be. And purportedly, politicians today and most people today would say that slavery is better dead and gone. Of course, if we really believe that, number one, we would be much more involved in the war against trafficking of human flesh today. The other thing is that if we really understood or were willing to acknowledge the nature of black chattel slavery in this country, we would have to acknowledge it was systemic, it was evil, both in the fact that it depended upon sheer violence and terror, as well as the dehumanizing of those made in the image of God. And of course, it involved the theft of labor, theft that probably in monetary terms today would amount to the trillions of dollars that were stolen from black people's labor and which enriched this nation at its very foundations. But all that's been bracketed by whites, making it look more like an unfortunate inconvenience upon black people. Some people would even argue that it was kind of a necessary passage for black people to be adapted to the West. Of course, that's all racist bunk, but the whole point is that you can't view slavery as a great evil if you're not willing to acknowledge that it did more than inconvenience and hinder and separate Black people for a period of time. I'm told that not a few people today have their weddings on the grounds of old Southern plantations because they take it to be romantic. But these same people would hardly have their weddings in the sight of prisons or funeral homes, even though for Black people, plantations were literally places of confinement, imprisonment, as well as death. So John Brown thought slavery was an evil. He even considered it an act of war by whites upon Blacks. And so he tried to fight it, and when he lost, he happily died for his efforts. So how can a nation that does not even see slavery as evil celebrate a man like John Brown? Now, secondly, there is no active lobby or agency that is funded and influential in society insofar as promoting slavery education and remembrance. In fact, there is an anti-lobby, so to speak, and it's active. An anti-lobby that denies the validity of reparations and wants to prohibit teachers from showing the realities of slavery and those connections that exist between slavery and segregation and present society. People don't want to talk about slavery, and they refuse to acknowledge it unless it is qualified by sentimentalities or fantasies or gratifying counterfactual films like Django Unchained, in which it blows up the plantation at the end, is really doing a disservice in the sense that it's showing us as something that happened when it never really happened, and when the real Djangos, time and again, were killed. So how can a nation that does not feel the urgency of remembering slavery and which fights and opposes slavery remembrance as almost a political and certainly a social necessity, well, how can such a nation celebrate the memory of John Brown? Now, finally, John Brown brought the war against injustice in our own land. He brought it before there was a civil war. And so he was criticized by our most liberal leaders, people like Abraham Lincoln, who was in actuality a half-glass full kind of liberator. You remember, Lincoln was willing to become president in 1860 by allowing the South to keep enslaved people in the South. He just didn't want it to expand. We know Lincoln actually acknowledged that he believed in the superiority of white people and wanted it to stay that way. Now, he may have been a benign racist, but he was a racist. And Lincoln spoke of John Brown as delusional. So Brown himself was hated by moderates in the North and despised by Southerners. In fact, for over a century, many Southerners even used John Brown's name as a curse. Why? Because John Brown put a scalpel to this nation's flesh and tried to cut away its evil, so-called peculiar institution. It was our nation that did those things and other evils, but it's always easier to point out other people's wrongs than it is to own up to our own. And that's why this nation can celebrate Bonhoeffer over in Germany, dying on a Nazi gallows, but can't even say anything of kindness, let alone celebrate John Brown, who died on a gallows right here in the United States. So frankly, I'm kind of sick of all this Bonhoeffer stuff. I'm sick of celebrating him. I'm sick of seeing white people especially making him a hero, not just because I'm a John Brown biographer and I want John Brown to get attention, but because it bespeaks the true double standard of this nation. My gripe is with a white society that cannot and will not celebrate John Brown and abolitionists because white society is nose-blind to its own history and is entangled in a long pseudo-history that really is based on denial, half-truth, and hypocrisy. So it either makes heroes out of its racist leaders like Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson, or it celebrates heroes in other places and in other struggles like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So today is December 2nd, and today I choose to remember John Brown on the day he was hanged by Virginia with the tacit permission of the reigning Democratic Party in Washington, D.C., only because he tried to start a movement that would liberate enslaved black people. Now, I don't care that he had to kill a few thugs along the way, particularly back in war-torn Kansas. Most heroes to white society have done a lot more killing, often killing innocent people in the name of law and order, or even in the name of democracy. I don't care if he vexes white people today, whether they're liberals or conservatives. I will remember John Brown because he tried, with a small army of white and black idealists, to bring slavery down to its knees. I will remember John Brown, an evangelical Christian who operated precisely opposite of what most evangelicals then and now did, by putting the downcast above the wealthy and the powerful, and by not counting his own life as more than the lives of poor, enslaved men, women, and children. I spit on the memory of the white slaveholders and land pirates who died at the Alamo. I won't remember the Alamo. I will remember Harper's Ferry. I will remember John Brown. And I will celebrate John Brown today, even if I have to do it all by myself. Now, the thing is, maybe I don't have to. That is, maybe I don't have to celebrate him all by myself. Because maybe, today, you'll celebrate him too. From New York City, this is Louis A. DeCaro Jr., and this has been John Brown Today.